The night was thick with static over the Black Sea. 3:20 a.m. October 21st, a few miles south of Sevastopol's guarded coastline. On radar it looked like calm water, but beneath the dark surface, something invisible was drawing closer every minute. Hours earlier, Moscow had quietly reopened its maritime supply route through a temporary deal with Ankara. The agreement was meant to restart the southern ammo corridor. 420 tons of shells, rockets, and propellant heading toward the Kherson front. On board the landing vessel, Vladimir Orlov, the captain, called it a diplomatic victory. He smoked in his cabin, confident that the corridor's new guarantee made the sea safe again. Nobody on deck suspected that the guarantee had just turned into a perfect pattern, a predictable path on a predictable night. Below, the hum of engines mixed with laughter from the mess hall. A few sailors shared contraband vodka, proud of their easy mission. They didn't notice what had been trailing them since the last buoy marker, a 22-foot unmanned surface vessel gliding just above wake level. It had no lights, no signal, no flag. The Ukrainians called it the Stork, a name that mocked its purpose. Its metal hull cut through the water at 30 knots, carrying inside a swarm of FPV quadrotors called Valkyries, each small enough to fit inside a backpack, each armed with a 1.4-kilogram copper-shaped charge. The entire system cost less than one Russian officer's yearly fuel budget. What it carried could rewrite an entire month of frontline firepower. Inside a makeshift control room 50 miles away, a Ukrainian operator watched glowing telemetry lines crawl across a tablet. He'd been following this same ship for 3 nights straight, learning every turn, every stop, every escort pattern. Tonight he had orders: break the supply chain, film the proof, and make the message unmistakable. When his hand hovered over the joystick, the tone in his earpiece changed. Visual confirm, target steady, south by southwest. He whispered a single word: go. The Stork's onboard processor armed the launch bay. 4 Valkyries folded their rotors open and waited for command. To reach the target, the USV still had to slip through a ring of coastal radar sweeps and electronic pickets protecting the entire convoy lane. Theoretically, no drone could make it through alive. Theoretically. But theory was built for straight lines and standard war. The Russian radar operators at Cape Violant were staring at a green circle glowing with boredom. The algorithms had been trained to detect jet signatures, not mosquitoes skimming waves. At 3:41 a.m., a faint flicker appeared at the edge of the display. One operator leaned in. Contact bearing 265, altitude 10 meters. He tagged it as possible recon.
We are following a developing situation.
The designation triggered a low-priority alert.
Has confirmed
Routine,
that the situation...
nothing dangerous. They had no idea that this single blip was part of a pattern designed to break their own logic. The Ukrainian operator understood that Soviet-era systems expected discipline. They predicted vectors and led targets. They needed logic to live. So he gave them chaos. He ordered the first Valkyrie to launch not toward the ship, but sideways across its path. The small drone caught a 30-knot crosswind and began to spin, looping counterclockwise like a drunken wasp. The radar, which could perfectly track a missile moving in a straight arc, suddenly had to solve an equation with no answer. Its target trace dissolved into a swirl of noise. The Russian gun director computer flashed unresolved vector. The crew had no idea the ghost on their screen was deliberate. They thought they'd jammed a faulty signal. In reality, they just opened the door. At 3:47, the next line of defense lit up, a TK-27M jammer mounted on a patrol escort a few miles away. Its operator, proud of his equipment, slammed the saturation key. The airwaves burst into electromagnetic thunder. On the Ukrainian console, the FPV feed turned into digital snow. GPS dropped to 0. For 30 seconds, the screen showed nothing but static. In Russian chatter, someone laughed. Blinded them! But that laughter died fast. The Valkyries didn't need satellites anymore. Inside each drone was a solid-state inertial navigator the size of a matchbox, using gyroscopes and accelerometers to feel every turn. The moment GPS died, it switched to physics. The drones kept moving. The Stork, now just under 2 miles from the target, lifted its signal mast. A directional antenna locked on and fired a focused burst through the jammer's haze. The operator's screen flickered, then stabilized.
2 flashes,
he exhaled once,
then thunder.
gripped the joystick, and launched the remaining 3 Valkyries. They rose together, weaving erratically, never once flying in a straight path. Each drone traced a wild spiral over the waves, following what Ukrainian pilots called the serpent helix, a pattern no radar could predict twice. On the Russian patrol ship, warning klaxons began to sound. The electronic warfare officer shouted for visual confirmation. A spotter with night vision goggles pointed over the port side. Multiple contacts low. Tracer fire ripped into the dark. The sea flashed orange.
There it is.
For every bullet, the drones shifted direction. The operator guided them like puppets, darting between arcs of fire, using the ship's own muzzle flashes as cover. Every second, the distance shrank. The CIWS, Russia's close-in gun system, came online with a deafening roar, spitting 5,000 rounds per minute. The night exploded into molten light. The first Valkyrie disintegrated instantly, a fireball vanishing beneath the waves. The next two dropped altitude to barely 3 meters, weaving like slalom racers through the ship's spray.
Almost
the guns
nothing
tried
left.
to adjust, but lagged half a second behind. That half second meant survival. The fourth Valkyrie rose suddenly, drawing fire upward. A sacrifice. While the barrels tracked high, the other two darted underneath the tracers, closing in on the vessel's midsection. Inside the operator's bunker, every heartbeat was measured in pixels. Distance to impact, 150 meters. 90, 40, then contact. The first drone rammed into an external ammo container bolted to the aft deck. The shaped charge cone punched through steel with a soundless flash. No cinematic fireball, just a bright dot of white that pierced the dark. For one heartbeat, silence. Then a second detonation. Smaller boxes going off one by one like dominoes of lightning. The blast ripped the deck plates open. Fire erupted, painting the sea in orange reflection. Through the remote lens, the operator saw crewmen running, some firing rifles into the air, others jumping overboard.
Blast signature matches
He launched the last Valkyrie straight into the growing crater. The screen went white. When vision returned, the ship was breaking. Its midsection folded inward, bow lifting as if in slow motion. A rolling shockwave flattened the water, throwing the patrol boat off its axis. The Vladimir Orlov began to sink stern first, ammunition still cooking off below. Within 90 seconds, a $180 million vessel and its 420 tons of shells had become a boiling reef of metal. From the control bunker, the Ukrainian operator leaned back. Visual confirmed. Target destroyed. His voice barely carried over the static. He didn't cheer. He just watched the thermal outline fade from his screen. What mattered now wasn't the explosion. It was what came next. By dawn, satellite analysts would verify a new crater of debris in the shipping lane. Moscow's channels would call it an engine malfunction, then a fire incident. But every radar crew along the coast had seen the truth. The unthinkable had happened inside their declared safe zone. The Stork had already sunk itself in self-destruct mode, leaving nothing but fragments to recover. And in the silence after the blast, something deeper shifted. Russia's logistics command had just lost its easiest sea artery. The strike didn't just sink a ship. It collapsed a supply schedule.
We need to reroute
Analysts
Sierra Squad to the
estimated that
docks
18
immediately.
to 20% of the artillery flow toward the Kherson sector depended on that single convoy route. Now, to keep their guns fed, Russian logistics would have to reroute through the crowded Crimean land bridge, a corridor already hammered by HIMARS and storm shadows. Every rerouted shell meant slower offensives, fewer barrages, and exhausted stockpiles. The arithmetic was merciless. One $60,000 drone package had rewritten millions of dollars worth of planning. At the same time, a different front was opening. To protect remaining cargo ships, Moscow would have to divert air defense batteries from the land front to coastal guard duty. Each Panzer or Tor pulled to defend a port left ground troops more exposed to airstrikes. The drones hadn't just killed a vessel, they'd forced the enemy to redistribute its entire defense equation. That's the hidden layer of modern war. One invisible algorithm can make steel armies stumble. By mid-morning, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry released a short statement with no footage, only a sentence. Enemy logistics vessel neutralized in the Black Sea.
The impact
But
cannot
satellite
be
leaks and
overstated.
fishermen
We're looking
videos
at
filled the
severe
internet hours
economic
later,
fallout.
showing a smoking column rising from the horizon. The caption read, "Cheap brain beats expensive
Command,
metal."
this is Sierra
It wasn't
2.
official
Requesting
propaganda
status
anymore,
on
and it
the
was the
road
new
ahead.
reality of asymmetric warfare. And somewhere under a low-lit bunker, the operator took a last sip of cold coffee, saving the final clip for review. The mission log would record a simple result. Target eliminated in 17 minutes. No parade, no anthem,
Atención,
just
atención.
silence.
Se ha
And
declarado
the
una
quiet
emergencia
certainty
grave en
that
la
the
zona
sea had
costera.
changed
Le
sides
rogamos.
again. By dawn, the air above the bay still shimmered with heat. The wreck of the Vladimir Orlov had vanished beneath the surface, but oil, debris, and ash floated in a slow spiral, turning the Black Sea gray. Russia's search vessels reached the scene hours later, expecting survivors, finding only a slick that reeked of propellant. For the sailors on the rescue boat, it wasn't just a loss, it was disbelief. The sea they'd been told was secured had just betrayed them. The footage leaked within hours. A fisherman's phone captured the second blast from 20 kilometers away, a silent bloom of light splitting the night horizon. That clip alone told the world the truth Moscow couldn't admit. The Ukrainians had struck deep, far beyond their declared range. But it was more than geography. It was psychology. Every captain in the Black Sea Fleet suddenly realized what that meant. There was no safety even inside their own waters. At Russia's southern command center, the mood curdled. An admiral slammed his headset on the table. "We've lost a ship under escort." His aides scrambled to find an explanation. Maybe sabotage, maybe an accident, maybe a missile. But the electronic logs told the real story. A radar trace of irregular low-altitude objects, a data spike from their own jamming unit, then total silence. The admiral stared at the map as if the sea itself had turned hostile. Ukraine hadn't just destroyed one vessel. It had destroyed an illusion. The illusion that cost equals invincibility. The Stork was gone, but its echo was everywhere. The Ministry of Defense in Kiev didn't release any footage. They didn't have to. Analysts filled the gap, publishing side-by-side images before and after. A ship, then a shadow. The West called it a precision maritime sabotage. The Kremlin called it a fire safety incident. But both sides knew it was something much larger. A quiet revolution in naval warfare. While Moscow drafted its cover story, Ukrainian logistics officers were already analyzing the impact. The southern Russian front had relied heavily on the sea route for rapid ammo replenishment. Losing that lane meant convoys now had to crawl across Crimea's land bridge, 100 miles of exposed roads, hit daily by guided rockets and partisans. In war, time is ammunition. Every delayed hour meant fewer shells raining down on Ukrainian defenders, and for the first time in months, those defenders could hear something rare: silence. That silence spread faster than the blast wave. On the ground near Kherson, Ukrainian infantry noticed the change before headquarters did. The steady rhythm of Russian artillery, the heartbeat of the front, faltered. For days it stayed erratic, then faded. Soldiers who had lived under constant shelling stepped into open air, blinking like men tasting daylight after years underground. One corporal joked, "You can tell when their ships sink, the sky stops growling." In Moscow, analysts tried to patch the strategic hole. The loss of one ammo ship wouldn't cripple the war, but the pattern terrified them. If a $60,000 autonomous swarm could erase a $180 million ship in international waters, what stopped it from doing the same to fuel carriers, tugboats, or even command ships? Within 48 hours, Russia's Navy issued new standing orders. No vessel sails without escort. No escort sails without electronic cover. No electronic unit stays idle even in calm seas. But that command created its own paradox. Each additional escort meant fewer ships available for transport. Each new electronic unit diverted from the front meant less defense for troops inland. Ukraine hadn't just sunk steel, it had forced Russia to rewire its entire defense logic. To protect a few ships, Moscow had to weaken 1,000 trenches. Back in Kiev, the small team that had coordinated the strike gathered for a debrief. Their commander, a quiet man with dark rings under his eyes, looked over the data on a dim laptop. 17 minutes, he said softly. And the corridor's gone. No applause followed, no laughter. Just the low hum of an air filter and the sound of distant artillery still echoing from the south. Someone whispered, "Worth it?" Another voice answered, "For the lives it saves." Yes. But outside the military rooms, a new front opened, the information war. Russian propaganda channels flooded the air with denial. State TV showed an edited segment of the ship's last departure, claiming crew negligence. Yet within hours, satellite firms released infrared heat maps of the explosion pattern. The thermal bloom was identical to a high-energy detonation, not an accidental fire. Independent analysts confirmed it. The story was no longer deniable. For every failed denial, morale cracked a little more. Russian sailors stationed in Sevastopol began requesting transfers. Some refused night duty on patrol ships, citing equipment instability. The fear wasn't irrational. They'd seen the videos, the drone's final seconds, the wobbling sea, the sudden white light, no radar warning, no missile alert, just instant annihilation. The kind of death you can't predict, only wait for. That's the real power of asymmetry. Not just in damage, but in doubt. The Ukrainians had introduced a new kind of terror, the invisible. In the age of cheap autonomy, visibility no longer equals safety. The ocean had become a chessboard where pawns moved faster than kings. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's planners faced their next dilemma: reinforcement. Should they pull high-value air defense systems from Crimea to protect the coast? Doing so meant exposing ground troops to air raids. Leaving them inland meant risking the rest of the fleet. Either choice hurt. And for the first time, Russia's admirals weren't thinking about attack. They were thinking about hiding. The Ukrainians watched it unfold with cold precision. Each move confirmed the strike's success. They hadn't just won a battle, they'd shifted the initiative. Intelligence reports showed radar redeployments, convoy delays, and new escort timetables, doubling fuel consumption. Every ripple of confusion was part of the plan. One operator remarked, "When you make them defend everything, they defend nothing." The global reaction came next. Western analysts called it a proof of concept, a glimpse of future
timestamp on the main feed is
decentralized,
inconsistent
cheap,
with the archive.
surgical. Naval experts debated how a small country with limited resources could bend a superpower's fleet using modified commercial drones. It It's not a drone strike, one commentator said. It's the democratization of precision. For the Ukrainian operator who led the mission, those words meant little. He hadn't done it for headlines. He did it for the sound that followed the explosion, silence over the villages that used to echo with shells. That silence was the only metal that mattered. But war never ends cleanly. Days later, new Russian reconnaissance units combed the wreck site, salvaging twisted steel and fragments of drone propellers. They'd build countermeasures, of course. They always do. Yet even if they learned to jam better, shield better, react faster, they could never regain the comfort they lost that night. Because technology changes faster than doctrine, and doctrine dies slower than ships. By the week's end, Russian state media reluctantly confirmed damage to a logistics transport. The admission came buried beneath unrelated news. But the implication was clear. Control of the Black Sea had shifted again. Ukraine hadn't just struck a ship, it had changed the cost-benefit equation.
Almost nothing left.
For every missile Russia built, Ukraine could build 100 autonomous drones. For every billion spent on defense, they could spend a fraction to bypass it. The final irony came days later, when a Russian columnist, a retired admiral, wrote a single bitter line in a censored post. We built fortresses against missiles, and we were defeated by toys. For the men who planned the strike, it wasn't about toys. It was about timing, math, and nerve. And when their commander reviewed the operation log one last time, he simply closed the file and said, "End of corridor." Because that's what the war had become. Corridors collapsing one by one. Supply command myth. Every strike tore another thread from the illusion of invincibility. The sea will remember this differently. To those who sailed it that night, it wasn't about politics or power. It was about survival. The sailor on the deck with the rifle.
The
drone pilot staring into
satellite
static.
trajectory.
Two worlds
Exactly.
separated by technology, bound by inevitability, and somewhere beyond the fog. As the wreck of the Orlov cooled in its watery grave, the currents carried away the oil and ash, erasing the evidence, but not the idea. The idea that courage plus ingenuity beats arrogance plus armor every single time. The operator leaned back to his console, pulled off his headset, and whispered into the dim light, "The sea's ours tonight." Then he powered down the screen. For a moment, the Black Sea was quiet again. Not peaceful, just waiting. Because this war isn't over. It's evolving. And next time, the drones won't just come from the water, they'll come from everywhere.